John, we are
Hey,
so excited to have you here.
I'm glad to be there. Thank you.
Katie and I've known John for, I think, since we were wee little children in our 20s.
Yes,
So he's seen
John
our
has been
evolution.
a mentor, sponsor, advocate, I think, for both of us over the last 20 years. So we
It
are
was not
just
very
like,
heavy lifting for you guys.
No, you've been great,
but so
John.
excited to have this conversation. Yeah.
Me
Okay.
too.
But for the rest of our listeners,
Yeah,
could you share a little bit about yourself, both personally and professionally?
sure. So I'm John Church. I was born in Massachusetts via Jacksonville, Florida. Ended up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Went to high school, middle school, and high school there, and then went to the University of Wisconsin. My dad was an ice cream plant manager, and I didn't really know what my dad did, but I knew for sure based on the amount of calls he got in the middle of the night and the fact that he went in at 5 in the morning and came home at 5 at night and was essentially asleep at 7 that I didn't want to be in the food industry. That was pretty clear to me.
I did not know this.
I
And
didn't either.
and I literally, other than mowing lawns as a kid, have never had a paying job outside of the food industry, whether
That
that's
is so
bussing
funny.
tables or bartending or slinging chicken or working at General Mills or being an intern at Pillsbury. So I went to the University of Wisconsin. I'm a bachelor's in chemical engineering. It's the only degree I ever got. The rest of the stuff was all experiential kind of learning. My wife and I have 4 kids. Our oldest is 33 and she lives here in the Twin Cities. We have a 31-year-old son who actually works at 3M, not with Courtney, but around Courtney. And then we have a 27-year-old son today. He's 27. They're all either with partners or engaged and about to be. And we have 4 grandsons, all under 4, all live in the Twin Cities here. So our life is, we have a big, full personal life. And then we also have a 15-year-old freshman, which is, it's fun to watch her kind of navigate being a freshman, being 15, and being like the favorite aunt. That's the part you guys know when you come into my office. Those are the pictures you're going to see, and sort of who am I and how do I show up. Uh, Personally, after working at Pillsbury as an intern in 1987, I joined General Mills in 1988 and spent 30, almost 4 years there. I started in product development, did new cereals and established cereals, moved from there into manufacturing plants, and I did that for about 10 years. And then moved back to our headquarters to lead the integration of Pillsbury and General Mills when General Mills made that acquisition in the early 2000s. Did that and formed this team of half General Mills, half Pillsbury folks that had to kind of figure out what the new General Mills was going to be. And then shortly after that, I joined the senior leadership team of the supply chain. I led engineering, and then I led everything except for manufacturing, and then had global responsibility since about 2008. I was on the senior team for about 14 years, and then retired in 20, or little R retired 2022, left General Mills, and was lucky enough to sort of leave at 55. My grandson had just been born. He was 2 weeks old, and had a chance to kind of figure out what I wanted to do in my next chapter. And that has turned into advising and coaching people, and now it's sort of evolved into board leadership and board seats for me. The difference between having an advising business and a consulting business is that consultants actually do work products. You hire a consultant, then they work and create a PowerPoint and an analysis. When you're an advisor, you get to look at stuff and give your opinion, but no PowerPoints for me anymore, which is kind of a nice break.
All right. I'm going to write this down as maybe like my
We need to be
retirement
advisors,
goals.
Katie.
Yeah.
Advising is
Yeah.
key. If you get to choose, advising is more
Okay.
is a
Okay.
better gig. Yeah, for sure.
I think you already answered it, John, but you're at a dinner party and people say, "What do you do?" How do you explain that
Yeah,
to
I
people?
I probably tell them what I did at General Mills because the board stuff, it's too tough and too many to talk about. But I used to say, I have this organization of people smarter than me that manage making Cheerios from farm to spoon.
Mm.
Everything in between, my organization kind of takes care of, and it buys stuff, we ship it into plants, the plants manufacture product, et cetera. And then we ship it out to customers. And then all of the support functions underneath that. I got a bunch of leaders that are doing great stuff, and I get to sort of represent the work they do to the senior team and to the board. And my kids used to say my dad puts the hole in the middle of the Cheerios, which uh, was accurate for about 20, 25 minutes of my career, but not the extent.
That's what stuck, though. That's what
That's right.
stuck.
And John, you've always been, as Katie said, just great supporters and allies of us. So can you talk about for you who've been some women who've inspired you and what
Yeah, you guys actually know. As I thought about this question, the first person is my wife. Actually, um, she is really remarkable, and she is courageous, and she has opinions on things that are informed by intense study. I mean, she doesn't go, half-cocked and come up with an opinion on something like to be honest, most men do. She's got her stuff together. She knows, she's researched it. When she's got an issue, she makes sure she listens to the right and the left to make sure that she's got the whole thing understood and then forms her opinion. So I used to say to her, she has opinions on things that I didn't even know were things, and so she's bright and informed and passionate about things, and yet interestingly, she doesn't have much of a volume switch, so she's binary. She's on or she's off, and so she's 100% in. She's everybody. If she's your friend, she's your best friend. She's ride or die. And she's the person that's going to help you through any hardship you ever had with absolutely no judgment because you and she are locked on. Um, or she's hidden in the closet, not coming out to see you because she's burning her energy on the things that are passionate and important to her. So, my wife. And then you guys actually know this person as well, a super important person to me for a long time, and now a friend, Colleen Sukup, who was the chief procurement officer at General Mills. But Colleen and I had worked together for 30 years. And you know, Colleen, what she did for me was help me see the importance of continuing to learn and grow. She's the person that is fueled by curiosity. She goes out and benchmarks to figure out what she can learn and do differently. So many people go out and benchmark other people or other opportunities to sort of prove that they're doing the right thing.
Mm.
They look for affirmation rather than opportunity. And Colleen was always trying to connect and ask why and figure out how it could be better. And so she's great from that perspective. She takes that courage, and she did some very complex things at General Mills. I asked her to set up a global sourcing operation that was going to service the world, and she had to go sell it to every business, all of which believed they could do things better themselves as small little businesses, as opposed to her thinking more broadly and globally and them capturing the scale that could bring. Um, she leads through courage, but at the same time, she is probably my benchmark for caring, getting
Mm.
involved. And I have very few trinkets and mementos from my career at General Mills, but I was looking and I have this little weight, and it says, "Be the change that you wish to be. Be the change that you wish to see in the world." She gave this to me. I was going through this like really rough time, but no, I wasn't trying to share it with anybody. But she knew I was at work, and this came with a card. It was on my desk one day. She wasn't working for me at the time. She was just a friend, and saw that, and so she's able to kind of manage the complexity of her life and her world, and she's got 4 kids and a career she's juggling and all these things she's having to learn, and yet she can see where I needed a little bit of help. Her connecting with me is something I will always remember and was always influenced by.
love that story.
Those are both great stories and great role models,
They
too.
are. They are indeed.
Okay, so we're going to switch it back over to supply chain now. And you started in product development early on, and then you spent a lot of time in manufacturing. When did you have, like, maybe, I don't know if you want to call it a light bulb moment or an aha
Mhm.
moment when you realized how important, like, the broader supply chain was, like, fundamentally to the business? Yeah.
There was probably it evolved for me. So
Okay.
there was the light bulb moment where you're like, okay, now I get it. But I will tell you my appreciation deepened over time. So I'll tell you, and there were three probably watershed moments.
Oh,
The
yes.
first one, the first one was I had just developed multigrain Cheerios, myself and a really small team. And so when I say I developed, I mean it was a small team of folks. We figured out how to make the Nukes Cheerios. It was a big deal at the time. Multigrain Cheerios is only the fourth Cheerios in the history of General Mills. So at that time, it was a big deal. Now there's
Mhm.
13 or 14 or whatever. And so, but when it was the fourth, um, and and it wasn't easy to do. It was by far the most complex formula we'd ever done. We were having to take four different grains and blend them together, and four different streams of product and blend them together. It was engineering complex, processing complex. There was a bunch of ingredients we had never used before. And so I was feeling pretty good about the fact that, we had put this thing together. And by the way, the consumers loved it. So I was all that. And then we realized we had to actually manufacture it at scale. We had to make money at it. We had to do it 365 days a year. And it wasn't going to happen in the pilot plant with me dialing in all the knobs and turning all the levers and stuff. But we needed literally a team of 200 people in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, to be able to come
Mm.
together and do this thing day in, day out, reliably at high quality. And I realized that while I was the start of something, it was nothing without this group of people who were going to operationalize it and institutionalize it. And then you realize the role you were playing, and it was this big because every one of those 200 people had a chance to make this thing work or fail, and they chose to make it work. But watching that come together was awfully important to me, and sort of that. Okay, I get it. There, that's important. Um, the next time was as the company, we had run the company, we were having a fair amount of success. And but global inflation hit in 2000 as China started participating in the world's economy, and suddenly commodity inflation went from a pretty benign 1, 2, 3%. There were always, a drought here or whatever, but it was kind of noise.
Mhm.
Um, and then suddenly global inflation hit, and we were impacting profits, and impacting profits was causing us to not be able to market our product as much, not be able to advertise as much. And we're a consumer products brand, right?
Mhm.
We weren't generic. We had to be able to tell people why our stuff was better, why they should buy our stuff. And we created this mantra that was really just lean as applied to product development and and products, which was it became known as holistic margin management, or HMM. And the part it reinforced for me is, we had sort of said, well, marketing, they develop new products and manage market share, and sales, they go sell it and get the price and get the revenue, and then supply chain, you're the cost center, just deliver the stuff, and if you add those things together, it's fine. Well, suddenly it was no longer fine. This plus this didn't equal success. The integration was the part that was important. And so suddenly the partnership between the business and operations, between the product design and operations, it wasn't about doing the same things better and increasingly better. There was continuous improvement, but that wasn't going to get us saved. It was going to be around doing different things. It was going to be around
Mm.
challenging our designs and challenging the way we did things, and then doing them better. That was going to be required. And so the holistic part sort of cemented for me the inextricable link between what I want to go sell and how we develop products, and then doing that marriage and the strategy was important and reinforced for me that you couldn't just operations wasn't a necessary evil. It was an absolute
Yeah.
integral part of what you deliver, right? Whether people take it for granted or not, it wasn't. And and as we did that better, we developed a competitive advantage. And then lastly, as I got into my executive role and on the senior team, I got invited to the board meetings all the time, and started getting invited to the audit committee meetings and to the public responsibility committee meetings. And the reason was because on every company's enterprise risk management chart, almost all the risks that'll bring the company to its knees are run by operations. You know, we we have a product that's not safe. We hurt a consumer. We hurt an employee. We have an environmental issue or an ammonia leak or a supplier that does something in bad faith or a manufacturing employee that does something in bad faith. And the idea that we need to build a system and a responsibility because this company had been around for 150 years, but at
Yeah.
the end of the day, all the brand payoff was what was done in operations every day. And it was either done really, really well or it was done poorly. And as such, was going to compromise all this brand equity and stuff we'd built. So that was maybe the last sort of, okay, I get it. I get why this is the big deal and why these people are so darn important.
I love though how with each of those examples, it almost like took a step back with each one and it didn't end. I mean, at that point, I mean, you were up in the
No,
C-suite and you were still
yeah,
seeing how important the supply chain was. Yeah.
absolutely. It got reinforced in different ways. So,
John, you talked about this when you were talking about, at the end of the day, it's the people that are gonna have to deliver
Mhm.
every day. And Katie and I, we have senior leadership, and we would say you really live as a servant leader. And as you think about mentoring and coaching someone coming new, and what are some practical ways or steps that they can take to really embrace that leadership style if they haven't experienced that or don't really know how to live that every day?
yeah, that great question. Thank you. I aspire to be a servant leader. I wasn't always a servant leader. I think when I came out of R&D, um, I knew how to when I went into a plant and I was the one who literally had invented multigrain Cheerios. I was pretty sure I knew how to run it better than everybody else. Um, and 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 initially, I started doing that. I started telling people what to do. I started adjusting. I mean, it was bad. My behaviors were horrible, and they were totally disempowering. Um, I realized I couldn't get it done if that was going to be the way I showed up. If I was going to be tell directive, because just wasn't enough of me to go around. And more importantly, I learned. It took me a while. I was young, but and dumb. But I realized that we were going to sort of squander all of the knowledge and expertise that all the rest of the folks were bringing that I really didn't bring to the party. And so, um, I, when I think of servant leadership, for me, the models are pretty simple. They show you the pyramid, and you're at the top, and the answer is you turn it upside down because the folks doing the work, where actually all the value gets added, they're the ones we need to serve. And at the bottom, you do three things: you provide clarity, you provide context for inspiration. So, what do we want to do? Why do we want to go do that? And then you remove barriers for the folks. You listen and you see and you get out of their way. Undoubtedly, you will find they're adding way more value than you could have because they bring their own perspectives, they bring their own expertise, their own talents. And if they're clear on what we're trying to achieve generally, and you are their biggest cheerleader and you run interference for them, they will do things that you could never could have imagined. So that part is proven true, and it became maybe crystallized for me. My first job after I led the integration of Pillsbury and General Mills was I was made the vice president of engineering. And while I'm an engineer, I had never done engineering for a corporation. So I had designed products and I had run plants, but the how do you take a product at this scale and make it at this scale and make money and be safe and all that stuff? I'd never done it. And I've never run a project and I'd never done sort of all the stuff that actually I know you guys have both done. Um, I'd never done it. And yet I was in charge of engineering. And it became really clear to me that I was not going to do right by these engineers if I tried to sort of add value to the process. I could not add value to the process. All I could do is be clear on what we needed and why we needed it, and then really listen to see what was getting in the way of their success and work to fight those things. And so I was sort of put in this position where if we were going to be successful, I'd love to say I was super altruistic and I figured it out. And the answer is, it became clear that I was running organizations bigger than I could manage. I wasn't talented enough to come up with the answers on my own. And so if you're going to be successful, and I'm pretty competitive and like being successful, I was going to make sure that everyone underneath me was successful, and so that was sort of how was forged. And I found it there once you get that, you can't ever take it away. First of all,
Mm.
you're dependent on being a servant leader. Your success comes from being a servant leader. There were some times, I guess, where crisis hit and I had to be a um, what's the analogy? The wartime general versus the peacetime general. Um, Really, still, then you were doing that as little as possible until you got people in a place where it was
Yeah.
steady and they could start being clear on what was next for them.
I love that because it's so simple. So clarity, context, and get things out of their way.
Get things out
Yeah.
of their way.
Yeah.
I think it's also a good reminder, and this was I don't know if you experienced this, Katie, but you do get to a point where you realize, like, I don't know, especially, like, as I come to a new company, so you
Yeah.
are gonna have to rely
You're
on your
Yeah.
forced
team
to.
and
Yeah.
let go of that feeling that you have to know and have to do and really have to lead through others, which is, for engineers, I don't know, it was hard. That was, like, a hard
Well, I think too,
transition
right?
for me.
Younger in your career, your success was it was you in demonstrating, like, I'm capable, I can do those
Yeah.
things. But it gets
I
to this place where, like, it's the
I
scope is so big.
call it the transition of smart to wise. You know,
Mm. Oh,
when
I
you're
love that.
when you're moving up in your career, you're paid because you're smart. You're promoted because you're smart. You're because you're and you better make sure you transition to wise,
Mm.
realizing that you can't do it by yourself, that there's people smarter than you on these things, and engaging them is what's going to be more successful.
Love that. Okay. We want to talk a little bit with you about this transition because we obviously worked with you as you were in this massive CSCO role, right? And
Hmm.
now you've transitioned to become this board member across actually several boards, not just a couple.
Yeah,
It's quite a few. Can you tell a little bit about like how did you get on that journey? What inspired you? Because it does sound like it's very different from running an operation. So, how did you approach this? What made you want to go down this path? And then, kind of curious too, like what you see across these boards from a supply chain standpoint.
sure, sure. So I'm on two consumer products boards, a financial ag fintech. So think the software that helps the agriculture part of the supply chain work. So it's not any it's all parts of the supply chain and the software that kind of connects them together. And then a board that does contract manufacturing. The company does contract manufacturing, a large company. And so they're all different, but they have some similarities. The evolution to board member, as I experienced over time, and you realize this, you guys will realize it someday too. Um, you get to a level where all you can do is provide guidance because you're not in the action every day to be able to provide decisions. Like if you provide me all the information, I can give you a decision. But the reality is, I probably need to provide you the context so that you can make the decision. It would just go faster. And so there is a bit of when you're on a board, you aren't the executive. You're the advisor, and if you're on a public board or even or a private board, there's a governance component. You need to make sure that the management team is doing the right things in the long term for the health of the shareholders or for the stakeholders. Um, you have a responsibility to figure out how the executives get paid and that they're appropriately incentivized and all that sort of stuff. But really, the job is around advising and taking the perspectives you bring and helping the management team make sure that they can see above kind of their desk.
Mm,
Because no matter what job you're in, it's always a ton and there's always the
yeah.
tyranny of the urgent.
Yep.
So if you're a good board member, you're kind of rising above that and being able to provide a perspective to say, hey, I like what you're doing. You should talk to so and so. You should you should think about this. One time, this is the one watch that I'd give you to think about. Here's what went wrong with me. And so, um, to be honest, I sat in the chief supply chain officer job for 14 years. You sort of evolved there anyway. I mean, the way I showed up years 12 through 15, 14 were really different than how I showed up year one and two in the supply chain role. So these board roles are around advising and helping and challenging and making sure that the executives' jobs are really well thought through and informed, that they're connected. So it's a different kind of servant leadership. There's a governance component, but the one thing you have to bring to the table is you are not the executive. It is never your decision. You don't know enough to make the decision. you can really only coach and guide. Um, and and that if you can keep that healthy balance, it's a healthy perspective for people. And as I think about the translation there, um, it really is reinforcing the hows and or divorcing yourself of the how the work gets done and being really committed to the what we want to go achieve and why we want to go achieve it, and bringing perspective to that, because the executives and the people in the company are the ones who have to determine how. They
That's
know
a good
better than
reminder.
you. They have better context than you, and they will make better decisions than you.
So, John, just tagging on to that, so you've been a principal in an advisory firm focused on transformation and strategy. And so, as you think about our listeners, what are some skills they need to be
Hmm.
successful in the decade ahead? Because as we all feel it changing
Yeah,
daily
yeah,
sometimes, like I
for
think
sure.
people are afraid, like, what does that look like?
So one thing, as I thought about this, one thing I think it's important that we not lose sight of is that the basics still work. The context changes, the speed changes, the technology changes, but there's a couple things that don't change. First of all, you have to start with a business agenda. Any transformation, anything you're doing as an operations leader does not start with an operations agenda. It starts with a business agenda. You then translate that into an operations agenda. And if you can't articulate, if you don't know the what of you're doing and the why you're doing it, um, you're going to be stuck because you've only got one. If you have a goal in mind, there might be 100 different ways to get there, and you're going to have barriers put in front of you. But you got to start there in order to have agility to get to wherever you want to get to. If you start with an operations plan, likely you will lose sight of what the business needs, and the business needs will change while you're merrily going along your way of putting in place an operations plan. So start with a business agenda. The other thing that I've learned, and I've learned this in boards, and I've learned this in transformation work, whether we was at General Mills with you guys or elsewhere. Um, it doesn't matter how smart your idea is and how good your tools are, if that 500 horsepower engine is not connected to any wheels. What I mean by that is, if the head of sales didn't trust you before you had the right answers because you installed all this great AI to help you and all this great analytics to help you think through and come up with an answer, the answer you didn't really have surety of before and the answer you're absolutely sure of now will still meet the same skeptical, I don't believe what you say and I don't trust you sales manager. And so a lot of people want to do transformations because they think it's going to make them get all better and solve their problems. And oftentimes, if the organization's broken, if the relationships are broken, if the trust is broken, if your operations team doesn't really care about what the business is saying or what the sales team is saying, it doesn't matter that they're right. They're not going to get any traction.
Yeah.
That works regardless. I'll answer your question, Courtney, in the next 10 years. We're going to have to figure out that you got to be able to embrace analytics and AI and large language models, and you need to figure out how to use it. You need to fall in love with it. You need to leverage it in ways that your company allows, but we'll all be left behind. And I think we'll continue to find, and there's already research that would say this is true. Companies that are coming out and starting AI native, starting with technology native, they're just faster. They're just because there's nothing to adopt. You don't have to like change manage. This is the way we do stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas you think about big companies that are transforming, they got to really go after it because otherwise they're going to be like bolting on capabilities as opposed to transforming capabilities. So, transformation used to be the wise people in the room trying to figure out how we could do stuff better. You need to be able, if you want to be successful, to sort of embrace the change and go after it. And that starts with I understand the technology, I understand what's important, but most importantly, I understand the use case. I understand what it is I'm trying to achieve. I know where I perform today. I know when I did the technology or the change, I now perform here or here. A lot of times people throw stuff in and they say, "Hey, look at our performance," but they didn't really know what they did before. So there's no way to judge. Was that worth the investment in time and effort and money? And So those are the kinds of things I think about. But while we get all enamored of the next technology, and I don't know where it's going, I do know AI language models and business analytics and the sort of ability of computers to make decisions faster than us. That's going to be a huge part of it, but it's got to be connected through a transmission of trust and relationships and an organization that works together, an S&OP process that works, that sort of stuff. Technology isn't going to fix bad behaviors.
A good
I
reminder.
appreciate that. It comes back to what you said earlier around making sure you understand the business problem. Because I do think if you understand that, you're building some trust and credibility there before you come in with
For
your
sure.
operations agenda. Yeah,
And
yeah.
you hold yourself accountable to what your customer wants, whatever that is, right? And you know, I refer to that as systems thinking. You know, I know, yeah, I know what I do, but most importantly, I know what I'm going to get fed, and I know what I'm going to give it to, and I know the place I play in that system. um, Systems are not going to be less complex. Technology is going to enable them to be way, way more complex. And so being able to see that, maybe that's the other skill set, is this ability to sort of understand what the ecosystem looks like and how it's connected.
Yeah.
That's going to be a really important part because no one's going to be able, we used to talk about, well, vertical integration, that's going to be really key, and control and all that stuff. You know, that worked for a while, but now there's going to be best in class. Everyone else is going to be best in class in something you're not. Why wouldn't you do business with them collaboratively and have them take care of the stuff that you don't have to be best in class in?
A good reminder.
All right. So we're going to switch it over to allyship, John.
Okay. I'm in favor of it.
Uh, thank you. Well, we also feel like we've been the benefactors of this. So, could you tell us a little bit about your views on allyship, not just that you're in favor of it, and then any stories there that maybe shaped how you approach allyship? Because we sometimes we will get questions like, "How do I show up and be a better ally? What does that look like?" And so we always like to hear from others and
Yeah.
their experience with us.
So it's been interesting. I benefited from an organization. First of all, I started in R&D. The R&D organization was awfully balanced in terms of women and men, and so I got to see really, really talented people. It didn't occur to me that, I mean, I could obviously acknowledge gender, but I saw role models that were men and women, and so I wasn't sort of predisposed. I think oftentimes when people come into operations, to be honest, because it's such a male dominated kind of a field in many, many companies, you have to sort of fight the natural inclination that men do these jobs because they just do. And you know, I didn't grow up with that. I didn't start with that at General Mills. I remember, as you know, what my first department head job, I had 3 women team leaders, and so if they were going to be successful, I needed to make sure I understood what was going to allow them to be successful as individuals. And maybe the servant leader thing kicked in, maybe the fact that I had young kids as well, and my wife worked. I could see what that looked like and understand that.
Mm,
And you know, I didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the stress on my wife who was working was a little different than the stress on me as a dad. Dads oftentimes get to play different roles, and so I could understand and appreciate maybe where some of my female employees were going to be coming from, and so I had a sensitivity and appreciation to help make them successful. What I tell you organizationally, how did allyship start playing through? And as a leader, what did I end up doing? Well, I remember we had made the commitment that we had all these incredibly talented women coming into the organization at lower levels, and they were self-selecting out. I mean,
mm.
we'd recruit them all. Couldn't wait to come make Cheerios, and you know, the brands were attractive, and the company said all the right things, and they'd come in, and about 3 or 4 years, they'd be gone. And um, and the head of manufacturing, had been my boss when I was a plant manager, and then myself, who was running engineering, we looked at ourselves and said, okay, this ain't going to cut it. We need to figure out what it is we need to know. And we created the first women in supply chain group at General Mills, may have been the first women in leadership group at General Mills. And there were 12 women, and we had to go down to the senior manager level to get 12. Otherwise, there weren't going to be enough. I remember meeting with the 12, spent all day with them talking about and kind of throwing ourselves on their mercy, saying, all right, help us understand What are the things we need to do? What did you have to overcome? So it was really an open heart and listening and being vulnerable, and then an intention to say, okay, this isn't going to work for us. We knew just the math wasn't going to work. We needed to have and retain these women in the workplace, and we knew that it would make us better, right? We'd come up with better answers. I saw a clip you guys had on a as you guys were talking with each other about women, it's your towering strength to lead teams and that kind of stuff. You had a clip on Instagram or LinkedIn or something I saw, and I agree. And so leveraging that talent was important, and we knew we weren't going to get as good as we needed to be, and we wanted to be the employer of choice. I think, you guys got to experience that personal commitment to that that led to, you have women in supply chain meetings now, and there's 60 women that show up in that room. And I used to go talk about my organization, and we had 40% of our plant managers were women.
Mhm.
As a senior supply chain leader, half of my leadership team was women. And yeah, it didn't come by accident. We had to go find them. We had to go understand what their needs were. Now, this is often said, and I think people use it as a throwaway, but women's rights are human rights, and women's needs are human needs. There was nothing that the women wanted that the men didn't want. It's just they weren't going to ask for it. And I think as we listened more and we got smarter at how do you just retain people and how do you do things, it played out the right way. Now, that said, the organization wasn't built to support women in leadership. That if I put a woman into a stretch role, she was going to need support. If I put a man into a stretch role, he had the whole organization to go help him. If I had a woman in a stretch role, we had to make sure we didn't just abandon her, but instead we provided the mentoring. It's one thing to put people into stretch roles, but you got to make sure you're there because they're stretched. We can't just say, well, you had the opportunity, sink or swim. We had to teach people how to swim and stand with a life preserver if we needed to every once in a while. So you needed to be committed to sort of being that person, being the phone a friend over time. And then you get enough people. You guys benefited certainly from male mentors, but you benefited a ton from female mentors because we put them there for you because we were committed to the process. What do I tell people? Allyship is a participation sport. It is not simply being okay with women in the workplace or not being offensive or all those kinds of things. That's not even a thing. I mean, that's just you have to create an environment where you're going to stretch and support people as people and acknowledge that women are going to have that and women and men as individuals will have different needs. And Courtney, your needs are and will be different from Katie's and vice versa.
Yeah. All right, I love that. Okay, we are at our final question, which is one of our favorite questions that Katie and we borrowed or
Okay,
benchmarked off of somebody, but we
I'm
call it
in.
hero hardship highlight.
Okay.
So hero, person inspired or encourager. You kind of talked about that already, but if there's anybody else, a hardship, difficult experience that you learned and made it through, and then highlight something you're really proud of or achievement that like you keep anchoring back to.
Um, I hope I'm not going to cop out on a couple of these, but I feel so.
That's okay.
I feel strongly enough about them that I'm going to give you sort of an answer to the questions. Hero, I don't have a hero. I find things that I love and respect and can learn from in everybody I meet. I mean, so I don't have a person that was like, wow, they just changed it. I can list 50 and I can list why and I can tell you what it is I like and what I admire. So for me, it's sort of become this composite inspiration. I think I get a ton of energy from people. I hated COVID because as cool as this is talking to you on a TV screen, I'd much rather have breakfast with you or run into you in the hall and get some real energy. So, that power of being able to find the right stuff, the admirable stuff, the stuff I could benefit from in many sort of people, was cool. And that's sort of how I live my life.
I like that.
Um, Hardship. Um, my dad died when I was 17. And so I was a senior, I guess, in high school, and he was not in great health. He had been an alcoholic for a long time and died at a very young age, 43. And neither one of my parents had gone to college. We didn't have family around, and so suddenly I became the man of the house. And so when bump in the night, I felt like I had this role I had to play,
Mhm.
and my dad had played that role, and so um, it was sort of trial by fire. And I was about to go off to college, and I didn't have any role modeling for that, and so I had to sort of like figure it out. And I think, Malcolm Gladwell, I think it was Outliers or some talks about, it's the grittiness of the people that maybe aren't the smartest but had to work the hardest. I think that it was, well, I wish my dad was around. I wish my dad was around. It certainly forced me to have to just become awfully self-reliant and decide that um, I needed to make it and survive and figure out how to navigate through stuff. And so the grit and resilience and persistence probably comes from that. Um,
Mhm.
I don't wish this upon you, but I will tell you that if it's upon you, I'll give you a hug, but you also have to decide that you're going to move on and win and grow. You don't get to check out. And so for me,
Yeah.
that would certainly be my hardship. And I would say was probably a crucible to help figure out who I was going to be when I grew up. And then what was the last one?
Light. We like
Eh,
to end on a
Um,
high.
you know, I got to work on do amazing things. My kids are amazing. I'm in a wonderful relationship with somebody. I could list all that stuff. Um, but on my retirement, I came to this point of view. I had run the supply chain for 14 years. There aren't a lot of people that run supply chains in a company for 14 years. There's a
Mm.
lot of people that do that job for 14 years, but usually there's like three or four companies on the list. I got to do it for 14 years. I get to spend 34 years at a company that had only been around for 150. So, more than 20% of the company's lifetime, I had been in a impactful role. I will tell you that there was nothing I built, no project I did, nothing I achieved that probably isn't gone right now. They've undone it. They've decided to do something different. The company has moved in a different direction because you realize that all that stuff was great when it was great, but it's not necessarily important today. Everything has context and everything has a shelf life. And there are better leaders than I could be with more information in a different world that'll come up with different things. But I had an important part in making those leaders. My legacy is that, you guys exist in the world. And while I don't claim you personally, I know that I had an organization that had an impact and that was important. And, there are remarkably talented people in the world who are impacted because we created an organization where they could be successful. And, that's pretty cool. And that's the legacy. And it sounds trite and everybody's like, oh, it's the people. But it's literally the only thing that lives on after you. Everything else plants will close, products will die, projects that were incredible will just get redone. I mean, all that stuff that you thought was a big deal at the time, it's now just part of the wallpaper. But those people go on and do really, really remarkable things. So it's fun for me to be on LinkedIn and kind of see, like, oh my God, look at this person. I remember when,
Mhm.
and sort of see that. I think it's super cool, and if I'm proud of anything, I'm proud of the small role I got to play with that.
I love that.
No, that's like
That's
mic drop.
inspiring. I know, that is a mic drop.
And yeah, John, you're definitely downplaying. Like I can speak for myself. Like Katie and I have both like just
Mhm.
felt your support, even as I've moved on and you've retired, little R retired. We just so appreciate you, and even supporting us in this podcast and our big, jumping out and trying this out. So we're just so happy to have you, and it's
It's
been such a
super cool. I'm
pleasure.
excited to watch you guys and excited to watch you in your careers. And I love sort of catching the next podcast and getting the tidbits from people I know and I don't know. And so I appreciate what you guys are doing. It's a good service to all the rest of us just trying to keep up with it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
You bet. Take care, guys.
Bye.